Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Exodus chapter 34. God has released the people from slavery, He's provided for them in the wilderness, and He wants to be their God. He wants to live among His creation, His people again. And specifically, He's going to do that through a covenant agreement He's made with the Israelites. But immediately, the Israelites turned their backs on Him and worshipped an idol, a golden calf of their own making. Moses interceded for the people, and God has forgiven them, to which Moses has given thanks and worshiped God and asked to see God in all His glory. God lets Moses do that back on Mount Sinai, where He's going to give him an updated version of those covenant terms. God reveals who He is and what He's like. He shows that to Moses, and Moses does not leave unchanged. And it all points to our current relationship with God through the work of Jesus Christ and His new covenant, where His Holy Spirit lives in us and moves us towards holiness. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Cut out for yourself 2 stone tablets like the former ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets which you shattered. So be ready by morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No man is to come up with you, nor let any man be seen anywhere on the mountain. Even the flocks and the herds may not graze in front of that mountain." So he cut out the 2 stone tablets like the former ones, and Moses rose up early in the morning and went to Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him. And he took the 2 stone tablets in his hand. Moses' plea for the Israelites and his plea to see God's glory has led him once again to the top of Mount Sinai. When he came down the last time and saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, he shattered the 2 stone tablets that God had written out His covenant on. And so Moses is instructed to bring up another set of stone tablets that God will again engrave His law into. And like before, it represents His unchanging covenant. God isn't vengeful. He's not going to change the covenant because of the Israelites' sin and idolatry. The same words that were on the first stone tablets are going to be on these new ones. And also, like the times before, strict warnings are given to the people not to come up the mountain while God is there. If you remember back in chapter 19, Joshua and Aaron and the elders of Israel were able to come up a little ways and get a glimpse of God's glory. But all rights to that is now forfeit because of the golden calf and because of the people's drive towards rebellion. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood there with him as he called upon the name of the Lord. Then the Lord passed by in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet He will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generations. And so just like the last chapter set up, God hides Moses in the cleft of this rock, and He passes by in all His glory and lets Moses see His back as he's passing by. Moses wanted to know God, and God, for the first time in the Bible, describes Himself further than just, "I am who I am." He gives this list of attributes about His character and describes who He is. Now, as a result, there are many ties through the rest of the Bible calling back to these verses and these attributes, reminding us of who God is and who God says that He is. Deuteronomy 5, Psalms 86, 103, and 145, Jonah 4, Nehemiah 9, and Joel 2 all use some combination of these traits to describe God. And when people claim that God is different between the Old and New Testaments, I feel like this is the verse we should go back to. God is filled with grace and love and mercy, and He always has been. And part of love is standing against evil and doing everything in your power to stop it. That's why God's mercy and justice here are not held in contradiction. They're extensions of that same loving kindness and goodwill towards creation. And finally, as we talked about back in chapter 20, visiting iniquity of the fathers on the children for multiple generations doesn't mean that He's going to hold the children accountable for the father's sins. He doesn't do that because that would be unfair, and He is a just God. Look at Ezekiel 18. What it means is that God is unchanging and everlasting. If parents break the covenant, he's going to hold them accountable. And if their children break the covenant, he's going to hold them accountable. And so on and so on. But I also think it's intentional that his loving kindness to thousands outweighs his punishment on 3 or 4 generations. Moses made haste to bow low towards the earth and worship. He said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, I pray, let the Lord go along in our midst, even though the people are so obstinate, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us as your own possession." Then God said, "Behold, I am going to make a covenant. Before all your people I will perform miracles which have not been produced in all the earth, nor among any of the nations, and all the people among whom you live will see the working of the Lord, for it is a fearful thing that I am going to perform with you." In response to all this, Moses has no other choice but to worship God. He prays and asks him to continue living with the people and be with them all the way to the promised land. He's humbly asking God to forgive Israel and restore the covenant. And God says he's planning on doing exactly that. He promises that if Israel keeps following the law, God will do incredible things with their nation. And not least among those incredible things is descending himself into bodily form as one of them, coming to earth, living among them, teaching and modeling godliness, humbling himself even to death on a cross, and then raising from the dead, defeating sin 3 days later. But all of that's coming in the far future. "Be sure to observe what I'm commanding you this day. Behold, I'm going to drive out the Amorite before you, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Watch yourself, that you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you are going, or it will become a snare in your midst. But rather, you are to tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, and cut down their Asherim. For you shall not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods, and sacrifice to their gods. And someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice, and you might take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. You shall make for yourself no molten gods." A big part of this covenant is that God is requiring Israel to not worship any other gods under any circumstances. God and his people are going to be exclusive. And he's so strict about it because he says in the promised land, people will be tempted to turn away from him. They're at risk of forgetting the Lord, the one true God who rescued them out of slavery in Egypt. And considering that they've already folded with basically no pressure in chapter 32, God has some pretty strict rules for them. They're prohibited from making covenants with other people groups to keep them from worshiping their idols. They're also instructed to tear down their altars and their idols when they inherit the land, or else they'd be tempted to worship at those altars and idols. And they're also instructed not to intermarry with the Canaanites. And it's not because they're Canaanites, it's because they don't worship the one true God. All these rules are put in place so that they absolutely will not worship any god other than the Lord who rescued them from slavery. Now, verses 18 through 26 repeat many of the laws that have already been given throughout Exodus. And among them are repetitions of the commands to honor the Sabbath and the Passover and the other festivals. The repetition represents a redistribution of the original covenant. And practically, it will help the future Israelites remember all of these commands when they're reading them over and over and over in the book that will become Exodus. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread or drink water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. And we're told again that Moses spends 40 days and 40 nights atop Sinai writing out the new covenant. This time, in contrast to chapter 24, he's doing it while fasting from food and water. It represents his grief for Israel's sin, and it also foreshadows Jesus' 40-day fast from Matthew 4. And we also hear that the 10 Commandments, or literally the 10 words from chapter 20, are specifically the laws being carved into these stone tablets. But they're not the only ones that matter, right? And Moses is instructed to write down all the other commandments too. It came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because of his speaking with him. So when Aaron and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. Then Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the sons of Israel came near, and he commanded them to do everything that the Lord had spoken to him on Mount Sinai. Now when Moses comes down the mountain this time, luckily there's no golden calf to be found. But even more strangely, Moses' face is literally shining, simply from being near the full, glorious presence of God. Being in his presence has literally changed him, and the people take notice. In the same way, people should see notable changes in us after we're in the presence of God. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take off the veil until he came out. And whenever he came out and spoke to the sons of Israel what he had been commanded, the sons of Israel would see the face of Moses, so the skin of Moses' face shone. So Moses would replace the veil over his face until he went in to speak with him. In fact, Moses' face is shining so brightly that he has to wear a veil over his face and cover it up just so he can speak to the other Israelites. And it's only in the tent of meeting, when he's talking with God, that he's able to take off the veil and be truly seen for who he really is, who God has made him to be. Paul meditates on this story in 2 Corinthians 3 when he talks about why he shares Christ so boldly. The logic goes that now the Spirit of God is not just something we experience in the temple or in the tabernacle or on Mount Sinai. He's living in our hearts and transforming us day by day into God's image. Moses may have needed a veil to cover up that secondhand glory he had received. But through the work of Christ, we have access to that same glory and a command to make it known to others. We have the freedom to live a genuinely holy life without needing the performative mask of self-righteousness. So in the same way that Moses here is receiving a new, updated version of the covenant, God has revealed a new, updated version of that same original covenant through the work of Christ. And when we believe in it, it changes us. And it allows us to become, over time, the true images of God that God created us to be. And we also get a responsibility to share that truth and that freedom with others so that they can take off whatever mask they might be wearing in their day-to-day life. But ultimately, it comes from nothing we can do ourselves. It's only through the grace of God, who is abounding in truth and justice and mercy and loving kindness. To him be all glory forever and ever. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.